Welcome to Ashtabula, Ohio, one of the many industrial towns of Ohio that's fallen on hard times, just up the road from Cleveland. And in its midst is the Ashtabula Mall, nowadays known as the Ashtabula Town Square. And like the town, this mall has seen better days. At least it's still relatively clean. The mall would host its grand opening ceremonies on October 7th, 1992, being a little late during the mall boom. Ribbons were cut, babies were kissed, and the mall was heralded as a resurrection of economic growth in Ashtabula County after its manufacturing base was stripped, according to the Plain Dealer. Developed by Phar-Mor, the Ashtabula Mall, as it was originally known, would host Dillard's, Sears, JCPenney, Kmart, and Phar-Mor No. 300 as its original anchors, with local department store Carlisle's expected next summer. With 1,200 workers and an 84% lease rate to start off, it was a strong start. Well, barely even 2 years in, and in 1994, Carlisle's would close shop as the chain went bankrupt, with Dillard's taking over the space to operate a secondary anchor in the form of a home store. Meanwhile, over the next few years, Phar-Mor would come under audit as a whistleblower called executives of the company out for fraud and embezzlement, which resulted in the CEO, Michael Monis, being arrested for 17 years and 7 months. This would segue to the company undergoing bankruptcy and shedding half of its store roster before re-emerging in 1995. However, competition against Walmart, CVS, and Walgreens would ensure Phar-Mor would undergo another bankruptcy, which would lead to total liquidation in 2002. I was unable to find a closing date for Ashtabula Mall's location, but it's implied to be near the end of the 1990s.
A star has no roots to hold it, no living, lonely entity to lose. To and fro it floats in the light of the sky like a...
The first half of the 2000s would at least be relatively quiet, and Steve & Barry's would even come in to fill the vacancy left behind by Phar-Mor in 2005. But the later half of the decade would not be kind, as it would see Dillard's close shop in 2007 and Steve & Barry's in 2008. And speaking of 2007, Ashtabula Mall would be sold to Cabot Investment Properties, whom would rename the mall to the Town Square. And boy, did a lot of inlines close shortly after, which included major names like Lane Bryant, Wendy's, GameStop, and Spencer's, among others. And it wouldn't get better as Walden Books closed in 2010. That dead end we passed by earlier admittedly gives me the creeps. I can't explain why. Something feels very wrong when I look at it. The mall had a strong start, and it even had a number of retailers in its roster like Old Navy. But what happened? Well, doing a little poking around in numbers, I think I have a rough idea. Oh dear, I'm thinking. Well, it's simple. Ashtabula is an economically depressed town with poor employment opportunities. No money means no shopping, or very little at best. The population is also on the downturn. They're not necessarily losing people in droves, but over the course of decades, people are moving out. There's plenty of history to go around in Ashtabula, and it still retains a prominent industrial port on Lake Erie, but with the significant loss of industrial jobs, Ashtabula slips further into poverty. And this isn't exclusive to Ashtabula. This is a story common among many working-class towns across Ohio and the Great Lakes. Getting back to the mall, a Walmart store built in 1995 is also blamed for the decline of the Ashtabula Mall, as why bother going to the mall when you can go to a supercenter store that has it all? Now, focusing back on the mall, the hits wouldn't stop as Sears closed their doors in 2012, surprising absolutely no one, and Cabot Investment Properties would get the boot as Bank of America foreclosed on the mall in 2011, with more fraud lawsuits underway. The mall would then be placed under receivership with Morgan Stanley Capital taking over before Surefire Group LLC purchased the mall in October 2014. Yes, Radio Shack still exists. They are really hard to find, so it's like looking for Bigfoot, but they're still out there if you know where to look. Enter 2016, and Kmart, which is seen up ahead, would depart the mall, and this left just JCPenney as the sole original anchor of the mall, with Dunham Sports filling in space as a junior anchor in 2008. And JCPenney would not last for much longer, as 2020 would finally sink the Ashtabula location, with AMC's six-screen theater closing its doors in July 2023. And with the loss of Jo-Ann Fabrics and Crafts in 2024, less than a couple weeks after my arrival, this would leave Dunham Sports as the final store you could call an anchor. And as you can see, the interior is rather sparse. There is a little more to this, however, as the mall would be purchased by Kohan Retail Investment Group for $10.2 million. Now, before you start, this ended up being short-lived, as Surefire LLC would buy the mall back, for a quarter of what they sold it for at that. No, really. Okay, all that aside, based on my observations, it appears the Ashtabula Town Square is pivoting towards mixed-use community services and businesses, with Planet Fitness and a health center taking over the former Sears building, and other buildings becoming home to a church organization and dance studio. Though the highlight of this trip was seeing a legitimate Radio Shack. As I've mentioned before, they're still around today, but they're rare enough where you may have to go out of your way to find one. Definitely one of the more interesting malls I've been to, even if it is clearly at a low point. Usually I give Cafaro grief for having ugly malls, where the only thing of interest about them is the main entrance facade, but in here, while the mall is still rather dark, there's almost a warmth provided by the light that is present, and the only awful gray carpet you see is localized to select spots, like the center court. Now, while there aren't many stores to speak of in this place anymore, the handful that are present are a bit more interesting than a live mall full of fashion boutique. I still remember the days when you could go to the mall for GameStop, Radio Shack, FYE, KB Toys, Walden Books or Books A Million, and even tools and hardware from Sears. The early 2000s was some of the last vestiges of that. And as of the making of this video, while this mall doesn't have a lot, you can still have a movie and game store, Radio Shack, Bath & Body Works, and a sports memorabilia store. Okay, sports doesn't interest me very much, but I can still get lost in a Radio Shack or that buy-sell trade store. Hell, nowadays I can get lost in an antique store. Okay, the water feature and the fish are nice, but that purple, almost pink lighting is an interesting choice. Almost reminds me of infrared. Well, until next time, Ashtabula County, this is Doomie Grunt wishing you and the Ashtabula Town Square farewell and good luck in the future. You're gonna need it.